Hey everyone, welcome to Professor Long's Lectures of Anatomy and Physiology. Please forgive the crudeness of these videos, but during the coronavirus shutdown, we have been forced to scramble to try to get information delivered to our students in an online fashion. If you're watching these videos, you're either enrolled in my class or you come across them on YouTube. Please note that these videos are intended for students who are enrolled in my Human Anatomy and Physiology 1 course at Del Mar College. If you're enrolled somewhere else or in another instructor's class, they may cover the information slightly differently and want you to learn things a little differently. Okay? Now, if you are in my class and you're following along on your list of things to know, we're going to be on page 7 for lab today. We're going to be going over these organs. This isn't all, excuse me, this is not all of the organs of the body, but these are the ones that I want you to know for now. And I'm going to be showing them to you on this model. Now, the first one I want to show, obviously, is this one up here in the skull, which is the human brain. And I think most people have seen pictures of the brain. It looks like a big pile of noodles. But if I ask you to identify this organ, either individually laying out like this, or up here, you would say the brain, or brain, okay? Now, the next organ I want to cover is going to be down here in thoracic region, which is going to be your 2 lungs. One of them seems to be falling out here, but these 2 large pink organs would be the lungs, okay? We could also take one out and lie it on a table or point to it this way and say, please identify the organ, and you simply say lung. Okay, there is a right lung and there's a left lung. Now, if you'll notice, this guy is missing his heart. We haven't been able to locate it, but we do have one from another model which is a little smaller, but I think everybody kind of knows what the heart looks like. This would be the human heart. So, ID the organ, heart. Now, there's a couple of organs that I want to talk about that are also here in the thorax. This light blue tube, you can't really see it very well because there's some blood vessels covering it, but this light blue tube would be called the trachea. The trachea is your windpipe. Behind that is another tube that connects your mouth to your stomach called the esophagus. And as the trachea comes down here and bifurcates or splits to go to your lungs, there's a little light green tube right here, which would be your esophagus. Okay, so if we ask you to identify that organ, you know it's the esophagus. Now, once we get below the diaphragm into the abdominal pelvic cavity, a lot of your guts or viscera are crammed in here very tightly. This large brown organ here, let me take it out, is called the liver. So you can see the liver here. It sits over in your right hypochondriac region mostly. If I tilt the liver up on the inferior margin or border of the liver, this little green bag is called the gallbladder. So liver, gallbladder. Got it? Good. Now, as I set that aside, this large structure right here, this green organ, is going to be the stomach. The stomach is connected here to this opening, which would be the esophagus, and then it connects here to this light green one. So this represents your stomach. Now, the stomach is going to be attached to a structure called the small intestine, which is attached to the large intestine. So if I look here, I see this light green looking noodle stuff, and I see this gray tube coming across here. All of this light green pile of noodles is called the small intestine. This large gray one would be called the large intestine. Another name for the large intestine is colon. The colon is the large intestine. This yellow stuff is just some submuscular fat that's in all of our abdomens. It's called the omentum, and you don't need to worry about it for right now. Now, just posterior to the stomach, and about the same color as the stomach, is this little light green organ here, this little light green knobbly looking thing with the white stripe. That is called the pancreas. So this is the pancreas. Got it? Now, I'm going to take these guts out, and I'm going to show them to you somewhat separated. Here you see, here from the back, I can see the pancreas and a piece of the small intestine, and then all of this is small intestine. All of this gray tube running across here and coming all the way down this side, everywhere that it's this gray color, is considered the colon or the large intestine. The last little bit of the tube is called the rectum. This little tan area is known as the rectum, and of course the opening at the end is the anus. Okay? So now, when I remove all of that, if I take apart the small and large intestine and I remove some of them, you can see a larger area of the pancreas here, but this little green finger-like structure hanging off where the small and the large intestine meet is called the appendix. It's over here in your right iliac region. So that would be the appendix. Got it? When all of that is removed, on this model, we only see one of these here, but this large brown structure here would be a kidney. The other one is missing. I guess he's a kidney donor. The kidneys are known as the renal organs, and these two yellow or bright gold-looking structures sitting on top of the kidneys are called the adrenal glands. Ad means two, and renal means kidney, and they're adhered to the kidneys. Our textbook likes to also call these the suprarenal organs. Supra comes from superior or on top of, and since they're on top of the kidneys, some people like to call them the suprarenal organs. I still accept adrenal gland, and one of the reasons is a major hormone secreted here is called adrenaline. That's where it gets its name, and we'll learn about that when we do the endocrine system in part 2. So far you need to know the kidney and the adrenal gland or suprarenal organ. And then this little blue bag sitting down here would be the urinary bladder, okay? So let me make sure I've gone over the whole list and covered everything that you are supposed to know. Yep, we've covered the whole list. So make sure you learn the names of the organs, okay? Each one of them. We could lay one out on a test and say, identify the organ, identify the organ, identify the organ. And on the lab test, it would be a picture of this. You'd have to identify whatever we put the pointer on. Got it? Now, one last thing I want to do is this. When it comes to our organs, especially in the thoracic and the abdominal cavities, we have some membranes that surround the organs called serous membranes. They're called serous membranes because they're filled with a fluid called serum. It's almost like having a really, really wet towel. Or if you took like a piece of saran wrap and you got it all moist and wet on both sides. They're very, very thin membranes and they're very moist. The purpose of these serous membranes is to help protect the organs and provide somewhat of a lubrication for them. Because as we jostle around, if you were doing jumping jacks or going for a run, your organs are jostling around and they would be rubbing against each other. Your heart, as it expands and contracts to pump blood, and your lungs, as they expand and contract to inhale and exhale, are rubbing against each other. Now, your heart beats about 108 to 109,000 times per day without interruption, and that's without any stress or exercise. Then it goes up even higher. If I asked you to take your two hands or your two forearms and rub them together about 75 times a minute, times 60 minutes an hour, times 24 hours in a day, that'd be over 108 to 109,000 times. You would rub your skin raw and you would be bleeding. Well, we can't have that for our viscera. And as they jostle around and move and slide across each other, they need some form of lubrication. I actually refer to this as my slip and slide theory, if you know what a slip and slide is, the long piece of plastic you wet and kids run and dive on it. Back when kids used to play outside instead of making TikToks. So now, if I asked you to run and dive in your front yard, you would not go very far because of the friction and it would scratch your body up. But if I asked you to lay down a slip and slide and wet it and run and dive on it, you would slip very fast and not get all scratched up because it reduces the friction. Now, if I asked you to put a hefty bag over your head and poke holes for your heads and arms and you wet it and you wet a slip and slide, then you would go even twice as fast because it would really reduce the friction. And that's exactly what happens for all of these organs. They have a membrane, a serous membrane that surrounds each of them, but that membrane has two layers. And so we're going to cover how I want you to learn this in just a second. Let me grab something so that I can show you exactly what I mean, okay? Let me grab another sheet of paper. Aha. So, if I took your heart, the membrane that surrounds the heart is called the pericardium, okay? Peri means around and cardium means heart. The ium means membrane. So now, if I surrounded the heart in a plastic membrane like this, right? We would say that this membrane is called the pericardium. But there's two layers. And since the word viscera, V-I-S-C-E-R-A, means organ, it's a generic term for organs, then since this one is touching the surface of the organ, I would say this is the visceral pericardium. If I took the second layer of that membrane and wrapped it around the heart, now I have two layers. The outermost layer would be called the parietal pericardium. Parietal means outer wall. And then the plastic layer here would be called the visceral pericardium. In lecture, I might ask a question that says, which membrane surrounds the heart and lies against the surface of the heart? A, parietal pleura, B, visceral pleura, C, visceral pericardium, D, parietal pericardium, or E, some word I make up or something. So you would need to know the membrane that surrounds the heart and lies against the surface of the heart is called the visceral pericardium. The membrane that surrounds the heart but forms the outer wall of the cavity is called the parietal pericardium. On a lab test, I would simply ask you something like, identify the membrane represented by the clear piece of plastic or by the white piece of paper. Visceral pericardium, parietal pericardium. It's kind of a cheesy way to do it, but we're working with what we got right now. Now, the exact same concept applies for the lungs, except for the name, the scientific name for the lung is pleura. So if I had two membranes lying up against the lung here, I have one up against the surface of the lung, and then I have a second. The clear piece of plastic would represent the visceral pleura. This piece of paper would represent the parietal pleura. Visceral pleura, parietal pleura. And they completely encapsulate the lung. In lecture, I might ask, which membrane surrounds the lung and lies against the surface of the lung? And you'd say visceral pleura. If I ask you which membrane surrounds the lung and forms the outer wall of the cavity, you would say the parietal pleura. Parietal means outer wall. Finally, thank goodness that most of the guts of the abdomen don't each have their individual names. There's one large membrane that surrounds most of your abdominal organs and abdominal pelvic organs. The kidneys and the adrenal glands lie outside of it, but most of these organs, particularly your small and large intestine and your stomach, are surrounded by a membrane called the peritoneum, or some people say peritoneum. It looks like the word peri-tone and then peritoneum or peritoneum. The peritoneum has two layers. The layer up against the organ would be the visceral peritoneum. The layer that touches the outer wall of the cavity is called the parietal peritoneum. It doesn't matter if I show you the small intestine, the large intestine, or the stomach, it would still be visceral peritoneum and parietal peritoneum. So you guys need to practice this. Look in your lab manual, read the text, the chapters in your textbook, download the pictures from the Anatomy and Physiology resources page, watch these videos as many times as you can stand it until you understand this information and you can teach it to a 7th grader, okay? Do it till you can't stand it, and then do it 5 more times. Do it till you understand it and can teach it to someone without looking at the list. You got to master this information. There's already a lot of information piling up, and there's more to come. So, listen, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you had as much fun as I did. I'll see you on the flip side in the next lecture. Thanks.